Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to Sigel Music Museum Live. We're delighted to be here again. We're going to talk about two grand pianos today from the Marlowe Sigel collection. One of these is an English grand piano and the other a French grand piano. I'm going to start with the English grand piano, and then we're going to spend a little more time on some of the details with this Erard French grand. We're going to start with this one. This is by Thomas Tomkison. So Tomkison was a builder working in London, and we don't encounter his name as frequently as some of the others, but during the height of his powers, he was certainly one of the larger makers in London and had a reputation of extremely good pianos, which I think was most definitely deserved. This particular piano was in a Scottish castle, and Marlowe bought it through Christie's at auction in 1983, and it sold actually out of the castle, and then he brought it to Boston. Tomkison was born in 1766, if I believe correctly, and let me just say that most of all of this information that we have about Tomkison was developed by Norman McSween and the late Tim Harding, and Norman in particular has been a tremendous resource for Tomkison, the builder and the man. There's a 2014 Gallup Journal article. This is wonderful about that, yes.
Norman says hello.
Norman, hello. Wonderful work. Rely on it tremendously. So, as I remember the article, he wound up actually in the Cook's Guild, of all things, but apparently this was not too uncommon for instrument builders to wind up in the Spectacle Makers Guild or the Watchmakers Guild or even the Cook's Guild. We begin to hear of Tomkison in connection with James Henry Houston. Tomkison apparently worked with Houston, and in the 1790s, probably early 1790s, and we first see Tomkison on his own sometime in late 1798. So by 1799 he's on his own. He's building pianos, he's building grand pianos and squares. Apparently he began his serial numbering with the number 1, and so it makes it a little easier to understand where he was coming from. There's a number in the low 30s that I recall from Tomkison. This one is number 210, so this would be made roughly in the period of 1802, and it's very characteristic of a grand from that period. You'll notice on the front name board here, we have two musical trophies painted on the name board on either side, rather well executed, looking somewhat like some of the painted musical trophies of Clementi, and even Astor and Thomas Loud was doing some work using some sort of similar figures. I've never seen one where they were quite so large and flanking the name in the middle. Tomkison enjoyed a little bit of flair. As I say, he had a reputation for building some very wonderful pianos, and ultimately would wind up selling to the Prince of Wales, where he got a royal charter and was allowed to state that he was maker to the Prince of Wales, and actually adopted the feathers as part of his logo from the Prince of Wales. So a man who knew royalty, a wonderful piano in the Colt collection had actually been at the Brighton Pavilion, built for the King by Tomkison, 1821. And that one sold about 2 years ago. This one is in all ways a very traditional English grand piano. The action looks very much like Broadwood and Stoddart from the period when you pull it out. And a few notable features. It's hard to see here, but I'll just say that on the side of the key cheek here, there's like a little ear where the molding follows the name board. This was something that Houston did, a couple other makers did, no one else much did. When you see an instrument that is painted that has this, you kind of have an idea that it's Tomkison. And then, just to say it, his export business was quite profound. So he was selling particularly into the South, into Charleston. When I go back to the newspaper articles, I find the name of Tomkison very repeatedly showing up as one of the fine names coming into Charleston to be sold. Also sold into Savannah, and there are shipments, of course, into New York and even Boston. But just to say it, the Southern people seem to really enjoy these pianos. From a sound standpoint, I think that they are at least as good as Broadwood, if not slightly superior. This one has not been tuned in a long time, and I've only tuned up a few notes so that you can get a feeling for what's going on. What happened with this one, it was in the basement area at the Sigel House. It saw a little more moisture than it probably should have, and it appears that an insect of some sort passed away on the brass strings and caused corrosion locally, because there's been a number of strings that broke in a very odd place in the bass. But if you'll just take a listen here real quick. So it has the characteristic deep bass of an English grand piano, a really nice treble, 5.5 octaves. This is an instrument that, with just a little bit of what I would call repair, not restoration, this instrument can come back and play for us again. It had some extensive work done by David Winston in 1986. David's work is always good, and in this case, I feel like the instrument is still quite structurally sound. It's largely at tension now, and so I think we would have a lot of success bringing this particular instrument back. We have an 1805 5.5 octave Broadwood grand that would make a nice juxtaposition for this one, so you can hear a Broadwood and a Tomkison from just about the same period. So I think that we will go ahead and do the work to bring this guy back and make him playable. I'll just ask quickly, do I have any questions yet?
David Hackett mentions that the 1821 Royal piano ex-Colt is now safely back in the Royal Pavilion in Brighton.
Yes, it is. I think the trust and such conspired to make the purchase and bring it back. Lovely instrument. You really want to go see that when you get a chance. Yes.
Allison Alcorn would like to know, do you happen to know where the 1821 Brighton Pavilion, well, that's the question you just answered, yeah.
That piano is back there, and it's in Brighton. So not hard to find. It's a lovely little town. Okay, I don't have a lot more to say about this one, because it is so typically an English grand piano. But just to remind everybody that with these pianos, the only iron that's in the instrument at all are these little gap spacers. There's 4 gap spacers that you have here. Otherwise, this is all wood and wire, and it's just about 200 years old, 198 years old. So I think it's doing quite well for what it was intended to do, yes.
Andrew Sigel has a question. Bring him back. Aren't instruments female?
And a lot depends on the instrument that I'm in front of. Some seem to have more feminine qualities than other ones. I haven't done something that I wanted to do, but if you will allow me, here is a picture of Thomas Tomkison. And I hope you guys can see this, painted by his friend at about the time that this piano was made. And the thing I like about this picture is that, unlike so many of them of the time, this fellow looks like somebody you might meet. He just looks like somebody that I kind of already know. So it's cool when we can actually see the builder.
I have a question from Wim van Moerbeek.
Yeah.
Do we know which price they sold at the time? Were they expensive in comparison to Broadwood?
So the piano that he sold to the king in 1821, as I remember, it was over 200 guineas. So And Norman can tell us the exact number in just a moment because he will certainly remember it. But it was about twice what a really top-of-the-line Grand would have sold for. And so, we're looking in the neighborhood of that, 100 pounds. We'll call it 100 guinea, since a pound or a guinea is a pound plus 1 shilling. Roughly in that neighborhood, 100 to 110 pounds would be correct. What does that equate to today? Well, just again to put it in perspective, in 1802, a governess might cost you a little less than 20 pounds a year to live with you and take care of the children. Bob Cratchit from A Christmas Carol was making roughly 15 bob a week, so about 30 pounds a year, and those were sort of slave wages. But you get an idea. This was 2 to 3 times the annual salary of somebody that was making do and getting by. All right.
Okay.
Well, I want to then move our attention over to this particular piano, and this one is by Sebastian Erard, made in Paris in 1817. Another, truly exquisite instrument. This one has seen a little additional trouble, so although I think it's also a competent musical instrument, and I want to see this actually come back and play for us at some point, because once again, Marlowe had done a lot of work, or had a lot of work done on it to bring it back. It's going to take a little more than the Tomkison to make the deal work. So let me show you a few features on this. First of all, the decorations are just wonderful. Over here on the side, we have this lovely set of flying muses, plucking the harp, and obviously the strong neoclassical influence going on here. All the sides, even the back side, are decorated with these lovely brass embellishments. And then on the corners of the keywell, we see these flying dragons, pair of flying dragons in brass, very well executed, extremely high detail, even in the little places that you can't normally see. So hopefully you're able to see this even in the glare of the lights and such. It's a little tough to bring both cameras in, and as you guys know, we're sort of posting this on both my Facebook page and the museum page to kind of help folks get a better sense. And then one more feature that I will be talking about. But what can we say about this instrument? Well, unlike the English grand piano that we just looked at, which has a keyboard shift so that you can go from 3 strings to 2 strings, and there's even a little tab you can pull up and go to 1 string, and it also has the damper lift. Those are the 2 main tone color controls that you have on the English grand piano. On the Viennese grand pianos from 1817 and the French grand pianos, we find a whole plethora of things. So the first to note about this instrument is that the quality of mahogany is really, really high, but they're using something that's very dense and very brittle. At first I thought it was rosewood, because when this piano arrived from it was also in the basement of the Sigel home. When it arrived here, I noticed that there was a lot of repair work to do, just bringing pieces back together that don't normally come apart, particularly with mahogany. But this mahogany is very dark, very dense, might be some of that really old growth heartwood that they often used earlier in the 18th century. And then we start to get into the piano itself, and it's got some great features. One of the most important ones is that this makes use of the agrafe throughout the compass. So with most instruments like the Tomkison, the wire actually passes over the top of a nut and then moves on out, and then we strike the string. One of the things that can happen with that is that you can actually strike the string so hard that it pops up off the little nut pin and comes dislodged. They didn't want that. They kept working on ways to solve that problem. Erard has solved it with these brass staples. This picture here, this is one of the graphs, and you see there's notched for each of the 3 strings. And so with an instrument like this, then the string can never actually get knocked up and get knocked out of place and begin to sound false. So it's a really great innovation, and we use that pretty much throughout modern pianos today. Here from 1817, Erard's already making strong use of it. So it's from the bottom to the top, and then at the top, in order to kind of make it one level more, he's got a little brass bar for the very last octave of treble, where he brings that on top of that staple, so that you get the most intense treble sound, and that's to really help bring the sound out of the instrument. It also has a much wider square tail than we normally find on English pianos. It's a little shortened, and then he's got overspun bass strings. So we're bringing a few things together, but the end result is a pretty pleasing piano. Like most Erards, the tuning pins are in the sloped part of the yoke for the rest plank, and that gives the string lots and lots of tension against that brass pin. In fact, so much tension that one of these pairs or triplets in the bass area has pulled their staple out, and that's why I was able to show you that one. We'll make sure that goes back in before we bring everything together. So triple strung throughout most of the compass. The last 4 notes in the bass are double strung and overwound. If you'll notice, there's nothing underneath here because I haven't put the music lyre back on, but here is the music lyre for this piano. And one of the first things you're going to notice is, look at all those pedals. We've got 6 pedals on this, and what this tells us is that unlike the English piano, we have lots and lots of things that we can do to change the color of the music. So of course we can raise the dampers, and we can shift the keyboard, going from 3 strings to 2. We also have a pedal that when it's depressed, it takes this bar here, which is covered in buff leather, and lets that down right in front of where the strings come off of their graphs throughout here. And so that provides that kind of buff sound where the note extinguishes quickly, but it's clear and you can hear it. Very unusual to find a buff stop on a grand, and then what a neat way of doing it, where rather than individually trying to come across like a harpsichord, which would only work on 1 string, this one works on all the strings, and it's throughout the entire compass. So you can make it the whole thing buff. If we take off the damper cover and look inside, we see some other things. So here is a bar with the stiff silk on it, and it's starting to come a little bit to pieces here. But what this does is it's like an individual strip here, and then that would actually lay down on the strings when I push the pedal and make the bassoon sound. And so you have the ability of making the bassoon sound. If you could look inside, what you would see is that we also have a set of sawtooth bars that when you press them will push in a moderator. And so a little strip of in this case, soft leather comes between the hammer and the string, and the hammer comes up and hits that first and really softens the sound. So we have also the moderator, and then most wonderfully of all, hanging under the bottom of this instrument is a bass drum. And I mean, it's a true bass drum. If you look at it, it's from 1817. Here's the drum, the whole mechanism. It's got the membrane, the tightening mechanism. Here is the little padded hammer that then comes up and beats the bottom of the drum. So as I press that pedal, I'm actually banging on the drum. And the drum is tunable, so I can actually go under there and change the tension if I wanted to and tune it. Also at the same time, Unlike the Viennese instruments that have their bells mostly mounted on the inside of the instrument, this is mounted from below. And we have these wonderful bells. So every time I hit the drum, I also ring these little bells. And this was known as Janissary, and very, very popular with Viennese instruments. I don't know French pianos as well, and so I was really startled to see how much total tone mechanisms that they were putting on this particular Erard. But you know, some really wonderful stuff. And you can imagine that it would be a little bit like a house of fire once you got started and really began to play. Also, this is 1817, where we've moved our way all the way up to 6 octaves on this instrument. So we've gone from 5.5 with the Tomkison to a full 6 octave instrument here up to the top F. And then the next stage would be 6 1/3, 6.5. 7 octaves, and as you guys know right now, we have the 7 1/3 octave nominally, 88 keys for the piano. And, you know, another wonderful instrument from the Sigel collection certainly will be on display. I do not know that I will have this one in playing condition by the time we open later this summer. I suspect not, because this one needs a little extra time and attention that I would like to take the time to give it. But as you know, not every instrument needs to play, and it isn't the philosophy of our museum to make every instrument playable. We do have more than a generous handful. We actually have more playing pianos than I think most museums of our kind could boast of. But we are careful when we think about, well, what am I going to put tension back on, and what am I going to bring back to life? I think this one can survive the tension. I think it needs a little more attention than simply some string replacement and some attention to the hitch pins that the Tomkison needs. And then after that, the Tomkison looks like it's ready to go. This one looks like it needs just a little more help than that. So we're going to be careful. Some instruments won't be brought back at all, and they shouldn't be. Lawrence Levin, always admonishes me to measure, and stop worrying about bringing things, back to some sort of playing condition. And I think that's a good admonishment. So we are making the measurements now on these 2 instruments that will be, part of the permanent record. And I think there's a question, actually.
Vim asked, does the Tomkison have a serial number or date written on the instrument?
The Tomkison has the serial number 210. It does not have a date, and as far as I know, there's no inscription on the keys. On this Erard, I will just mention that if I lift the name board out, and it's interesting the way it comes out. It's a little bit different than what we have with an English grand. One of the things that you can do with this piano that you can't do with an English grand is actually pull the key lever out. It's not actually attached to the action. It activates the action from within. Even on our modern grands, we can't do that. And then this one is just wonderful. So both the bass key and the treble key have multiple signatures from all the people that worked on it. And on the soundboard, it says that it was made in 1816. On the name board, it says 1817. What does that tell us? Well, this was probably made in December, or certainly late in the year of 1816. When they got around to getting the name board calligraphy done, it was already January, and things had changed over. This is not the first one that we've seen like this, but it's neat when they will leave a bunch of signatures and dates and things inside the piano. It helps us not only know who the maker was, but who were the workmen and journeymen who were working at the time. That's part of the record as well. And as I say, this one is generously decorated with that. Tomkison, not as much, and really never was. So one of the interesting points at our museum is that we have this very early Tomkison grand, and we also have the very last grand that Tomkison ever made in 1850. It's the number 2405, There might have been a 2406, but it doesn't seem to be extant anymore. But then Tomkison closed up his shop, and that was it. That last grand has some really innovative things, and I will be talking about that for one of our sessions. Certainly a very interesting piano all to itself, yes.
Vim asks, does the Erard have the Etrier action?
Well, this action is the, and that may be the name, guys. I'm not going to tell you that I know it has what we call the yoke action. So this is the one from roughly 1808, 1810, not the next action he would invent, which is sort of the beginnings for the modern piano action. Looks a lot like a modern piano action. This one is a sort of an intermediate thing. It's not the English grand piano action. It's certainly not Viennese. It's his own style. I have yet to actually pull the whole action from this. I was looking at that this morning, and you want to be careful before you pull an action. Little things can go snap in the night. So we want to be careful with that. But I'll have a little bit more on the action of this one. And as with all things, the hive mind is really important out there, forte piano and harpsichord friends. So please feed us back with information that you have, best places to go look for things. We're all learning as you're learning. We acquired these treasures, and usually when I was buying pianos myself, then I would have done a fair amount of work, as I was buying it, and then after the purchase. On some of these, I'm learning almost as you're learning yourself. So I'm going to actually leave it there. Are there any more questions before we go? All right. So once again, as you guys know, we're all sort of sheltering in place. We're trying to bring you the museum before you can come see us. And certainly for our folks in Europe, I know that a lot of people, that it'll be a while before you're able to travel freely, but please do come. In the meantime, we could use your support financially if you can give it. Consider doing that. If not us, consider somebody close by that you love, and help them out a little bit. These are tough times for everybody, and I know for musicians in particular, it's being really difficult because you can't get an audience together and earn a regular living the way you did. But in the meantime, we're all going to keep bringing you the museum as best we can. And then even after we open, as I've said before, I think this is such a good idea, we're going to just kind of keep it up. So I'm going to sign off for today. I'm going to thank everybody very much, and we will see you on Friday.